welcome back to our Male Fertility Summit. It's a guy thing. This is our first day, and we're talking about things that every man needs to know about his health and his fertility. I am super excited to introduce Dr. Philip Worthman, starting to be a pretty good friend of mine. He's has the Center for Male Reproductive Medicine and Vasectomy Reversal down in Beverly Hills. He's a surgeon to the stars and an absolutely wonderful, down-to-earth doctor who can explain just about anything you'd ever want to know about male fertility in really clear terms. So I'm really happy and thankful that he's joining us today to talk about the male biological clock. And do men actually have a biological clock, and what does that mean for their health, for their fertility, for their offspring, for their partners? It's a good conversation to have. So welcome, Dr. Worthman.
Thanks, Sarah. Wow, with that kind of build-up, I hope I don't screw this up. That was very sweet of you. Thank you. Yeah, so shoot with questions, and we'll discuss.
All right, and Kristen is also on the line and may chime in with questions of her own as we kind of walk through this.
I'll just sit quietly and stalk for a little while, but I'll jump in if I feel the need. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Worthman.
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks for inviting me.
So let's start off with just an overview here. I've seen a couple articles come out about this last year about the male biological clock, and we all know that women have one. Or we're very, as women, aware of our biological clocks, but we don't hear so much about men and what happens to them as they age, what happens to their fertility, what kind of changes take place in their body. So maybe you can just start with, do they have a biological clock? Is that something that's real or what?
The male biological clock is not exactly analogous to the female biological clock, or equivalent to it, in that a male biological clock is much more open-ended than the female biological clock, which is probably finite for almost all women by 50, where their ovarian function seems to decrease significantly, as does their egg reserve. Men clearly make sperm way past the age of 50. I've seen men in their late 80s who have very good sperm count. So sperm count may drop a little bit in some men, may drop further in other men, but certainly testicular function, male hormone function declines, probably starting in the mid-late 30s. Testosterone levels start dropping, and nowhere near as high in men in their 40s on average as they are in men in their 20s. But then again, every now and then, I'll see men who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, or higher who have unbelievably great testosterone levels, and it's just their body functions that way. I think the reason why the conversation about the male biological clock has perked up again is several-fold. There have been a couple of studies, one that came out a number of years ago, probably 2 or 3, that looked at the relative risk of a child born from an older father developing schizophrenia. And I remember reading the headlines, and it says, chances of schizophrenia double in children born to fathers over 40. Well, that's kind of scary when you look at the headline. And then I got the paper, and I started reading. So the first question you have to ask is, well, what is the chance of schizophrenia in someone who's born to a father under 40? Well, the chance is 0.25%. So the doubling went from 0.25% to 0.5%. I'm not sure that's headline-worthy news in my book. Right. It certainly wouldn't stop me from having children, and I'm 50, and I just had my first child this year, and gosh, I hope she's not going to be a schizophrenic. And I don't believe that because I was, almost 50, really, really significantly impact her chances of having that illness. The next thing that came out was a link between older fathers and autism and the risk going up. Another thing it's a big question mark. There was a big New York Times article about it, And the problem is that no one really knows what causes autism. So it doesn't mean that if you're over 40 and you're having children, that being over 40 causes autism, because no one knows what the cause is anyway, and it's probably multifactorial. We do know that autism is going up significantly in the United States, in the last generation, and I'm not sure why that is, whether it's the environment, whether it's all sorts of other things. I guess to Jenny McCarthy's chagrin, it seems not to be related to childhood immunizations, which she promoted quite heavily and probably did a huge disservice to many families by advocating that their children don't get vaccinated. And here's the part that stupefies me. That a parent won't listen to the doctor or the Academy of Pediatrics, but actually takes the medical advice from a former Playboy centerfold. So, to me, the world's turned upside down here. This crazy stuff. But going back to this, there probably is some age-related link to autism, but again, is it something that we really need to worry about? Well, I also think there's another factor in that. There are some doctors and some organizations that want to stir the pot. They want to get their name in the news. They want to comment about these things. It's provocative. It makes headlines. I'm not sure this stuff is really headline worthy. I've been practicing in Los Angeles for 18 years. I wish I had some wood in my car to knock on, but the truth of the matter is I have not seen an increase in children that have abnormalities born through either in vitro fertilization or born to older fathers, and many of my patients are older. It's the nature of the business in Beverly Hills. There are a lot of older men over 40, depends what you call older, but certainly men over 40, marrying women under 40 in my geographic area, and I just luckily don't see it, and hopefully, won't ever see it. But I just don't want to make a big deal about it. I know some people have advocated that younger men should start banking their sperm. They're under 40 and haven't had children yet. Okay. I guess there's no harm in that other than the cost. And who's going to deal with all the sperm that are going to be sitting around in cryo tanks in years to come? But it's one of those things that, if I had a top 1,000 things in the world that I have to worry about, this is not even close to that list.
Good. Well, thanks for that introduction, and it's very. I think it's very comforting to hear that as a lot of older men are trying to think about, what does this affect me? What should I do? So I think that it is very comforting to hear that it's not definite and not a definite and not and there might be a cause for concern, but it's very small.
Sara, can I ask a question? I have a question. Sure. Listening, and I love how you explained it, that it's an open-ended change for men, because when you talked about women from 45 to 50 going to menopause, there's specific changes that women feel, between the hot flashes and the change in regularity in their periods. So if I was to ask you, Doctor, do you see men experiencing any symptoms that are similar, even though that this is an open-ended process for men? I mean, is there some, patients come into your office and say, I'm experiencing, tiredness or whatever it is. Do you find similarities when the decrease begins in men?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. Clearly, men, when their testosterone level drops between a certain to a certain level or below a certain level, might start experiencing symptoms. It's not the same for all men. And let me explain what I mean. I see patients that actually have low testosterone. Most labs, the reference range on the low end of testosterone is about 240 nanograms per milliliter up to about 750 or 800. So that's normal. That's a pretty big range. Sometimes I'll see men with a testosterone of 200 or 150, and I'll ask them, "You're having symptoms?" They didn't come to see me for symptoms. They came to see me for something else, and I happen to get their lab test results back. And they'll be, no, everything's fine. My sex drive is good. I can get an erection. I function perfectly fine. And then there are men who we see who are in normal, in the 300, sometimes 400 range, that complain of symptoms. So what are those symptoms that you asked about? So the big symptoms that I see, the big 3 or 4, are, number 1, lethargy. They're tired. Number 2, they have difficulty focusing at the end of the day. Their mind just isn't as sharp as it once was. Number 3 is their libido drops. And number 4, which is plus minus, is sometimes they'll have problems not only with libido but also with erectile dysfunction. So those are the things that are common complaints. Plus, commonly, men will say that they're depressed. And their depression could be related to low testosterone. The thing is at what age will this occur? And that's where it's open-ended and quite variable. In many men, this won't occur. And in some men, I might see patients as young as early 30s where this process is starting to happen. Now, clearly other things can be going on in their body. They can have some sort of pathology that causes their testosterone to drop that is not associated with aging. It's just associated with the pathology getting worse over time, such as having a varicocele. We know can impair testicular function, and we know that the longer somebody has a varicocele, the more that function can become impaired. It progresses over time. So I'm not sure whether somebody who has a varicocele and comes in at age 35 complaining of this, whether the low testosterone is related to their age specifically or just having a varicocele for 10 or 15 years.
Right. So the question that I want to follow up with about the varicocele, though, too, and then also, so it seems to me, which I love that we're having this conversation this week about men, is that there's so many similarities, but it's very different. Because when you listed off those symptoms, right, difficult focusing at the end of the day, they're lethargic, and so those can go under all different categories also. So if by having a conversation like this, that, maybe this should be a test, to test your testosterone, because maybe this is a factor for you. And I think when you brought the varicocele, my personal experience when my husband at the time and I were trying to conceive our children, he ended up having a varicocele. And so he was 30. And the analogy that we used before, and Sarah heard this one before, but I wear glasses, doctor, and I flunked my test when I went to go get my driving test. And they said, didn't you know you didn't see? And I'm like, no, I thought everybody saw this way. And then I got a pair of glasses. I was like, wow, this is a brave new world. I can see so much better. So a man with a varicocele, if he has no clue what a varicocele is, like my husband at the time, I said to him, well, did you know that it was, he said that, well, yeah, it was kind of hot, and sometimes his scrotum was, sticky to his leg because it was so hot in there. But how would you know if you don't know what a varicocele is, right? That's not right. You would just think that's normal for you. And so that kind of question goes back to what you were saying even about menopause or a male biological clock, because you might be just thinking this is typical for you. I'm tired at the end of the day. I don't feel very good. Maybe it's maybe it's all these, environmental factors that, could also have some of those symptoms. So I think maybe my question would be, how do you know when it's not just normal to you or well, I don't want to use the word normal, but there's something that they should call you about, red flags for that, for a varicocele,
So I think the first thing is if someone's experiencing symptoms, they need to go in and get checked out. And likely, depending on who they go to see, look, if a man is having some mild depression, well, lethargy, decreased focusing, decreased sex drive, and erectile dysfunction, are all symptoms of depression as well, as low testosterone. So if someone calls a psychologist or psychiatrist, they're not going to order a testosterone level. They're going to get put on Lexapro or Prozac or Paxil, perhaps. If they go see a urologist that is in tune to this, then before any of that stuff happens, they might just order some lab work and get a testosterone. Like I've seen people who have been depressed for many, many years, and as soon as we diagnosed them as having low testosterone and repleted their testosterone, their depression went away and they depress it. So it's kind of interesting. That's not to say that most men who have depression, that it's not real depression or situational depression or real psychological depression, that it's physiologic. I don't know. I don't know if anyone's ever actually looked into this. But it's certainly something to think about. And since you've asked that question, and we're giving advice to men, if they have these symptoms, this is something that has to be up on the differential diagnosis that the testosterone might be low, and it's not just garden variety depression. In terms of the varicocele, I think the only ways that men could tell if they have varicocele is, number one, if it's very large, it becomes evident when they stand up that it feels like a bag of worms. Sometimes they can actually see it by looking or see it in the mirror. Typically, varicoceles go away when a man lies down, so if you examine himself lying down, things will appear normal. It has to be after he's been standing for a while for the varicocele to actually fill with blood and to notice a difference. So that's one way. Another way is if there's a difference in size between the right side and the left side. Varicocele is more common on the left than on the right, although many men have both sides affected by varicocele. But if they had a fullness on the left that wasn't present on the right, that felt kind of like those gummy worms, then that's certainly the sine qua non or the characteristic of a varicocele. Third, some men get pain in their testicle, a dull ache, usually worse at the end of the day and goes away after they lay down or after a good night's sleep. That's the classic varicocele-induced testicular pain. And we see lots of men who come in because of pain and no other symptoms. And varicocele can cause that.
That's so right there. That is so important to scream about, to scream that out for men to hear, because the follow-up to this story was my husband at the time was diagnosed with a varicocele, and then he had surgery. And, of course, we were doing all this research because we didn't hear about that. We didn't know about it. And lo and behold, his best friend had the same procedure a week before him. And so they didn't talk about it. They didn't say anything to each other. And the only reason why he said something to him, he's like, well, I can't go that day because, I got this procedure thing going on, and I got this thing called a varicocele. And then his best friend goes, oh, yeah, I had that, too. I just had my surgery a couple weeks ago. Isn't that weird? And I thought to myself, they didn't talk about it. They didn't tell each other, and they both had the same thing going on. And it's very different than women, because of the communication factor. But just what you said, just knowing the symptoms of being aware, kind of like a self-check breast care. If you have this, if you're feeling this, then you need to call the doctor. So that is so helpful, especially for people who are just entering the fertility world. That this checklist for men is so powerful, just to be mindful, just to be aware of this. So thank you so much. Thank you.
So Dr. Woodman, I want to kind of go back to the testosterone thing. So I know that in women, going through menopause, we can get some symptomatic relief through various kinds of hormone applications, and I with all the commercials and such around testosterone, I know that that's one option for guys that are experiencing or kind of going through andropause and or dealing with a varicocele and have low T. But I also know that if you're trying to conceive, this might not be the best road.
Yes. So that is a really important point. So there's a couple of major things you brought up in that question. So I'm going to try to separate it out so I address all of them. So the first is the treatment of low testosterone. The second is the commercials. And the third is the fertility issues surrounding this. So if I don't hit one of them, please remind me. So let's go to the treatment of low testosterone. So for someone who is not interested in having children, and certainly for a man who's older in their 50s or 60s, taking testosterone, if their testosterone is low, will typically help their symptoms and help their symptoms significantly. The issue, though, is then they're going to have to go on lifelong testosterone. Now, testosterone is replaced in one of a number of ways. So, number one, it can be given as a shot, an injection, and that injection can be what we call a depot injection, which means that it usually lasts for a couple of weeks. Depending on the man, it could be a little bit longer. How they metabolize testosterone could be 3 weeks. I've seen some men who are younger on testosterone that want to take a lower dose twice a week, which I'm not crazy about, that idea, that dosing regimen. So that's one way, is by depot injection. Now they have testosterone pellets, and you can implant 3 or 4 months of pellets under the skin. That's another way for someone who only wants to come in 4 times a year versus coming in every 3 or 4 weeks. But of course, we can certainly teach somebody how to give themselves a shot of testosterone, and they can do it at home. Number 2, second way of repleting testosterone is via cream or a gel. But that's a daily dosing regimen. So the men have to apply this daily. And for some men, that's kind of a pain. You have to, you take your shower, because you have to put it on after the shower. You don't want to wash it off. And you have to put it on your hands, your arms, your chest, wherever. And it's kind of sticky, and you got to wait for it to dry for a few minutes. There's now a roll-on that actually has testosterone, like a speed stick. Some men like it. Some men find it a bit inconvenient. In terms of how men feel after getting testosterone via one of these 2 delivery modalities, some men like taking the shots because 3 or 4 days after the shot, they get this really nice pop, and they're feeling great, and then it gradually, as the testosterone gets metabolized, they kind of come down off of it, and that's when they know they're time for their next shot. And it kind of follows a bit of a rhythm, like normal testosterone. On the other hand, the creams or gels, men are more consistent in that they're getting daily dosing, so they don't have highs and lows. And again, some men really kind of like that consistent plateau feeling, and other men like the high and the low. So really, it's a bit of trial and error. There's a bunch of different ways to give men testosterone. It's whatever works for that individual best. It is what should be done. The question I get asked frequently is, can men take testosterone by mouth? The answer is no, and the reason is that steroids get degraded by the acid in the stomach, number 1. And number 2 is anything that penetrates gets, the word I'm looking for, it gets converted in the liver and becomes deactivated, but that can also cause some hepatotoxicity. So, and it's mostly because of the liver issue that testosterone isn't given as a pill. There's some other modes of delivery. There is a little patch you put in your mouth between your cheek and gum. Trying to think, there's probably 1 or 2 other ways of getting testosterone. So let's go to the issue of fertility. So when I started this conversation about testosterone, I said, this is good for men in their 50s and 60s. And it's lifelong therapy, because once you have been on it for a while and you stop, then your body stops making testosterone on its own and you crash. And we'll get to how the hormone system in men is set up in a couple of minutes, because I think it's important to understand. But before that, and it ties into fertility, before that I want to talk about the fertility issue. So in younger men especially, it's very dangerous to put them on testosterone because it will sterilize most men. Now granted, that sterilization is usually temporary, but in probably 5 to 10% of men, if they've been on testosterone long enough, their body might not recover sperm function, and that will obviously impair their chances of becoming a parent. And I think it's very important that any doctor who prescribes these medications and anyone who is thinking about going on these medications needs to know, hey, this is going to turn my sperm count into 0. It's not just going to lower it a little bit. It will sterilize me most likely. And there is a chance of that being permanent. So why does testosterone cause infertility? Why does it shut down sperm production? Well, if you understand how the male hormone axis works, it becomes very, very simple to see. So how do hormones work in men? Well, there is the hypothalamus and the pituitary glands, the master glands in the brain. Those glands regulate hormone function for a variety of different things, thyroid, reproduction, so on and so forth. The pituitary secretes 2 hormones. One is called luteinizing hormone, the other is called follicle-stimulating hormone, LH and FSH for short. LH is delivered into the bloodstream in pulsatile fashion, and it gets to the cells in the testicle that make testosterone called the Leydig cells, and it stimulates the Leydig cells to secrete testosterone. FSH gets into the bloodstream, and it's taken up by the support cells of the testicle and tells those cells to increase sperm production. Well, testosterone that's made by the testicles then gets back into the bloodstream, and there are receptors on different cells in the body that use the testosterone, but there are very sensitive receptors on the hypothalamus and pituitary gland for testosterone. So that testosterone, when it's available in the bloodstream in large enough quantities, will then saturate all the receptors on the hypothalamus and pituitary, and it has a negative or inhibitory stimulus, meaning it shuts down the secretion of gonadotropin-releasing hormone, the hypothalamic hormone that causes the pituitary to release LH and FSH, but it also has an inhibitory effect on the pituitary, so LH and FSH stop being released. So then what happens? Well, if the LH and FSH levels drop, then over the course of the next few hours, the testicle is going to stop making as much testosterone, and the testosterone level in the bloodstream is going to go down. Well, then the receptors on the brain aren't saturated anymore, so then the hypothalamus releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone again, and it causes the pituitary to release LH and FSH. And now we have a rhythm, right? This is a biorhythm that over the course of a number of hours, your body stimulates hormone production. That hormone production comes back, turns the brain off, and then when that hormone drops, the brain turns on, stimulates more hormone production. It's like a thermostat in your house. You set it for a certain temperature. When the temperature gets too low, what happens? The heater kicks on, brings the temperature up. This is exactly the way the body works. So here's the problem with taking what we call exogenous testosterone, testosterone from the outside world. You get a shot of testosterone and boom, your body absorbs it. Your brain receptors are now saturated for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Or if you're taking it every day, your brain receptors are saturated all the time. So that means your brain is never making LH and FSH. And indeed, when we measure those hormones in men who are taking steroids, we see that they're almost non-existent. You can't measure them. They're undetectable. So what happens is there's no stimulation to the testicle for the testicle to function on its own, to make its own testosterone, or to produce sperm because there's no FSH around to send the signal for the cells in the testicle to go ahead and mature and become sperm. Your body doesn't know where the testosterone comes from. The receptors just get saturated. So what happens is, over time, and we see this with bodybuilders or men who have been on testosterone for years, the testicles atrophy. They get smaller because they're not being stimulated, and sperm production goes down to 0. So that's physiology. It becomes very, very clear once you understand how the system works why taking testosterone, if you're interested in fertility, is bad. So now let's talk about the third thing you brought up, which is commercials. So there's a new disease out there. The new disease has a name. It's called low T. This was not a phrase that anybody used 5 years ago. The drug companies are now selling billions, that's billions with a B, billions of dollars worth of testosterone by advertising directly to the consumer, directly to the man, and showing, a guy who doesn't feel so good, and they rattle off the symptoms, and then he goes in, he gets his testosterone, and he's happy again, all symptoms have gone away. And of course, there's a disclaimer at the commercial, if you're having any of these symptoms, you've got a problem. And, some woman runs through this in a low voice really quickly and rattles off, pretty much 40 or 50 different problems. This is a big problem in our society. I'm not sure how it should be addressed. I'm not sure what's appropriate. But clearly, the drug companies are trying to create awareness for a situation, and that situation exists in some men, and it doesn't exist in other men. But what's happening is there's a huge increase of men coming in who want to have their testosterone levels checked. And look, I'm all for giving men testosterone if they are symptomatic and they have low testosterone. Where I have a big problem, except in extraordinary and extenuating circumstances, is giving men with perfectly normal 400 or 500, nanogram per deciliter testosterone levels, putting them on testosterone because they want to feel better. Well, better is sort of a relative term, because this stuff causes harm. In the short term, potentially, it might make somebody feel good. In the long term, it can cause a huge number of problems. The biggest problem I see is, truthfully, it resets someone's perception of what normal and what good feels like. Meaning, if you have been taking testosterone for a while, and then you stop, you crash. You don't feel good. And not only that, it's very difficult to get the body to make testosterone at as high a level as it once made or once got while you were on the testosterone. It's almost like taking a narcotic. You take that morphine the first time, and I don't know, this is what I'm told. You take the morphine that first time, and you feel euphoric, you feel great. But you can never get back to what that first high was. And the reason is because of upregulation of receptors. The opiate receptors, after you've saturated them, cells make more receptors. It takes more and more drug to saturate them. And I think they call that chasing the monkey. You can never get back to where you really, felt great. And that's why people become addicts. And they keep using more and more levels of the drug to get the same feeling, which is how they overdose. Because morphine stops people from breathing. It stops respiration. So at some point, the dose you need to feel good also is the dose that happens to kill you. Well, clearly, this isn't the case with testosterone. It's not addictive in that same fashion, and I just draw a very loose parallel so people can understand. But what happens is perception of how you feel with a testosterone level of 6 or 7 or 800 and perception of how you feel with a testosterone of 300 or 400 might be quite different. And so even with a normal testosterone of 300 or 400, that same man might not feel very good. He still has the symptoms even with a normal testosterone. And that's in part a function of taking testosterone when you don't need it. And it's very dangerous because then you either need to be on high doses of testosterone for your life, or or you just don't feel good. And I see this in patient after patient. It's really very, very frustrating. So what I worry about is that the drug companies and these ads are creating a whole generation of people who might have significant issues going on or getting hooked on testosterone. There's some other issues in terms of health with testosterone. There was a VA study whereby vets with heart disease who were given testosterone had a much more significant incidence of having an adverse event, a significant adverse event, such as a heart attack or stroke, such as they stopped the study. Now, clearly, that was one study in a very sick VA population. not the best monitored population, and certainly, issues with VA healthcare, as we see in the news every day. I'm not sure how to take it, but we just, it tells us that we need to be using this judicially. Certainly under a doctor's care and in the right circumstance, testosterone is a great thing. It makes people feel better. But I just worry that we are creating a situation where we're putting men on medications that don't necessarily need to be on them, and we're doing harm in that regard.
So, Doctor, was this a drug that was the low D? I did see that commercial, and I had no clue what they were talking about. So I'm glad that you're addressing that. But was that medication being used beforehand for men who were qualifying or who would benefit from it, and now they're going mainstream with that medication as a marketing branding, so that people show up in your office saying, "I think I have low D." So is that the same medication that you were using?
Yeah. So it's low T with as in Tom.
Oh, T. I thought you said C. I was like, I don't understand that, but go ahead. Okay. But so was that the medication that was around, or is it a new drug company doing that?
Yes. No. It's all medication that's been around. The other thing that people are promoting is a lot of anti-aging and men's health clinics popping up, and they're promoting bioidentical hormones. They're selling medications out of their office. They're jacking up the prices to ridiculously high numbers. They make the patients come into the office to get the shot every week as a way of increasing revenue. There's no reason why, if someone wants to, they can't just go get testosterone. Again, when I say someone, I mean a patient who needs to be on testosterone, is seen by a doctor, and has gotten a prescription and okay to use testosterone. Why they can buy a bottle of testosterone, which is reasonably inexpensive, at their pharmacy with a prescription, and under supervision be able to, after being taught appropriately, be able to give it to themselves. Where it gets under my skin is when doing this becomes a money-making racket. And a lot of the anti-aging clinics are doing this sort of stuff. And it's infuriating. They're putting men on thousands of dollars worth of hormones that, might be $80 or $100 or $200 if they were just given a prescription and could go get them at a reasonable pharmacy. A lot of these programs are just huge ripoffs. They're causing harm. I even saw one clinic actually change the reference ranges on the labs, meaning they drew blood at their clinic. They sent the blood out to a reference lab. They got the result back, and then they reprinted the reference ranges on the clinic's own stationery, changing the reference range from 240 to 750 or 800 being normal, whereas 800 to 1500 was normal. And now anything less than 800 was abnormal, meaning any patient walking into that clinic has low testosterone. By their definition, the way I happen to find out is a patient got a copy of the actual lab from the reference lab when he requested his records, and got a copy from the clinic, and he brought me both of them, and I looked at the two sheets next to each other on the same day, came from the same lab, but yet the reference range was changed on the clinic printout. To me, that's criminal. It's horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. But this is what's going on, and this is the danger that's out there.
So circling back to this idea of the male biological clock, there's this idea of, you're getting older, you're starting to decline in your hormonal function, your fertility may or may not decline along with that. And testosterone is not the answer if you're A, trying to have kids, or B, you're still kind of within the normal ranges. Are there things that men can do naturally or otherwise to stay healthier, younger, longer, to improve their fertility, to improve their functions without having to go on testosterone?
Absolutely. Before I address that, I want to address one issue that I didn't address in terms of the biological clock. I'm glad you brought it up again and circled back on that. there is an issue that we've seen with older men having more sperm DNA fragmentation, meaning that the DNA inside the sperm have to be intact when that sperm gets into the egg to deliver the DNA such that it can interact with the egg DNA to make a child. And in a number of conditions and in infertility, we see that sperm from infertile men have much higher levels of sperm DNA fragmentation. And many things cause high levels of sperm DNA fragmentation, including being sick, having a fever, having a varicocele, being exposed to a number of medications, such as antidepressants, being exposed to toxins, so on and so forth. But apparently, age, in and of itself, independently can increase the level of sperm DNA fragmentation. So where is this an issue? This is an issue because high levels of sperm DNA fragmentation over a certain threshold value might lead to a higher level of miscarriage. Now, what's interesting about this, though, is that a young, healthy egg might be able to repair a damaged sperm. So an older man with a younger woman seems to do much better than two older parents. And I just wanted to bring this up for completeness sake. Going back to your other question, in terms of what men can do in a more natural way to stay healthy, to improve their testosterone levels, there are a number of things. So let's talk about what things can cause low testosterone that are very common. So number one is obesity. I just read something online where like 90% of Americans are predicted to become obese by the year 2030. Some startling piece of evidence came up looking at trends and predicting this. Well, obesity in men can lead to low testosterone for a variety of different reasons, and I won't get into the actual biologic mechanisms of it now. But certainly, if someone is either overweight or obese, and we define these by their body mass index, normal body mass index is about 20, 25. Once you get over 30 to 35, it's overweight. Once you get over 35, 40, the classification becomes obese. Over 40 is morbidly obese, where it's really negatively impacting your health. So once you start getting a BMI over 25 to 30, it is possible that your testosterone is affected, that your estrogen goes up. So certainly watching your diet and maintaining a good weight is a way of remaining healthy. And if you are obese and you have symptoms of low testosterone, then losing weight in a variety of different manners would certainly improve testosterone function, testicular function, as well as fertility, because, interestingly, obesity in both men and women has been linked to infertility. And there's a linear correlation. The more obese you are, the less chance of getting pregnant you have. So diet clearly is an issue. Number two, exercise. We know that both cardiac and weight training improves testosterone. It also, when done properly, will decrease the BMI and help people lose weight. So it's important to get at least 3 hours a week of cardio to maintain proper health. Number three, stress. The stress hormone cortisol is released by the adrenal glands, has a negative impact on testosterone. So people who are chronically stressed clearly have issues. With other hormonal functions, testosterone being one of them. And that's why guys will complain, honey, I'm stressed, tough day at work, their libido's not there. They can't get an erection, right? Stress negatively impacts the male psyche and negatively impacts the reproductive and sexual portion of the male psyche. So, lowering stress. This has been a challenge for me personally. Run a busy practice, it's stressful, I think most men are stressed. I think most people in today's modern world, with all this technology, are highly stressed. I can tell you what works for me. I'm not sure it's going to work for anybody or everyone else, but certainly I take a day a week and I just shut off all the electronics and I disconnect from the world. That does wonders. But the next day, you're back into it. A friend of mine was just telling me about meditation-based stress reduction, where you take some time for yourself every day and you meditate a little bit, and easier said than done. Everybody has to find their own path and their own focus, but just ways of getting back in touch. And, you know, when you feel like you're on the treadmill and you can't get off the treadmill, it just keeps running and running and running. That's so stressful. It's so harmful. It negatively impacts so many different facets of life. It impacts happiness. And truthfully, it might even impact aging. I saw a very nice YouTube video from a professor from the University of Massachusetts, whose name unfortunately escapes me now. And in this video, he was presenting data that he had accumulated in a number of different studies, highly scientific, evidence-based stuff. And he looked at the telomeres of highly stressed, sort of yuppie type A individuals and Buddhist monks who meditated. Telomere is the end part of the DNA that is responsible for repairing the DNA. And the length of the telomere relates to age and relates to its function. So long telomeres are good, short telomeres are bad. So when the telomeres go bad, the DNA can't repair itself. It leads to either cell death or it leads to aging or cancer, so on and so forth. Not good things. But when he looked at these two different groups, he found that the telomere lengths for the same age-matched cohorts are much shorter in the group that's chronically stressed versus the group that meditated and is pretty much not stressed, chilled out. Significant difference. So then what he did is he looked to see what happened, and he took a group of chronically stressed people with short telomeres, and he put them through a 2 or 3 month meditation-based stress reduction program, and then remeasured the telomeres and found that there was a change, that the same patients' telomeres elongated. So the line he liked to use is, some people use the phrase, you know, they have a shocking event and they say, oh my God, that thing shaved years off my life, whatever that stress was. He said, you know what, scientifically, that's actually true, that if you're chronically stressed, you may be shaving years off your life. So I thought this was very interesting. I actually just saw it about a week ago, so I haven't had a chance to really research it out as thoroughly as it need be, but certainly this researcher, this professor, has very, very good credentials, and at least at face value, what he says seems to make sense. And I think that incorporating these type of things into your life, at the end of the day, will probably make you a happier, healthier person.
Well, that's my area of passion for me, which is that's my focus within my fertility coaching, is helping people who are farly removed from adapting mindfulness or meditation or coming from being a type A personality myself, having my own company when I was 22 and being the president of the chamber and doing all those things. And when people hear the word meditation, I find that if you're not in the practice of meditating, there's an instant knee-jerk reaction that you think you need to be sitting on top of a mountain with your legs crossed like an Indian and holding your hands in a certain way. And meditation can be in very different forms. And one of the simplest meditation that I think falls right into someone who was like me, a type A personality, is simply setting your intention. so many women and men, the first thing that happens when you open your eye in the morning, you reach for that iPhone, right? Because our iPhone's not only our camera and our brain, because it has our calendar and it has everybody's contact information, but it's also your alarm, right? So your alarm goes off and it's your iPhone. So that's the first thing that your smartphone you reach for. And one easy and quick way to be mindful and set your day, your tone for your day, is just to open your eyes and say thank you, and make the statement of what you're hoping to do that day. Move through this day with ease and grace, or be of service to others, or be in a state of awareness of how I can find peace in these moments. It's so powerful just to take that 1 second and not grab your phone and start looking at your emails to set your intention, or just simply say thank you. And that is a profound way of meditating.
Absolutely. What you're talking about is gratitude. And
right,
gratitude is very, very important in terms of a mindset. Someone just sent me this weekend an article from the Harvard Business Journal this month in terms of gratitude as a strategy. And I haven't read it yet, but if the Harvard Business Journal Business Review is publishing something about it, I certainly am going to read it. It's on my list to do once I get home tonight. As you say, meditation doesn't mean going up to the top of the mountain and secluding yourself from civilization for 20 years. Very few people want to do it or can do it. But there are different techniques, and gratitude being a very, very simple one that everybody can kind of do. The other thing is being present in the moment, which, again, for me personally was very, very difficult because I was either thinking about what had just happened or what's going to happen, and I was never thinking about what's going on now. And, it's rough. And I have an 11-month-old daughter, and if I'm always thinking about what I just did or what I have to do, I have no space for her. What I had to do is learn, quite simply, to just be here, not worry about what happened to me yesterday or last week, not be angry about whatever crap I would have been angry about, for whatever stupid reason, and, not worry about the 15,000 other things that, are on my to-do list, that I can't enjoy the time with her if I'm worrying about both of those things. You have to clear your head, and you have to actually sit and be present and just enjoy the moment. And whether it's sitting in my backyard and just listening to a bird or even a car go by, or, smelling some of the flowers that are back there, literally, and just being still or being present in whatever it is that I'm doing with my family or, anywhere else. Just focus on what's in the present and let the other things go by wayside, and I found it's drastically reduced my stress. Now, there's other tools I use, but those are, specific to my likes and my personal, connections, and everybody needs to find what works for them, because what works for me might not work for you or for Sarah or for your husband, and so on and so forth. But I think, you raised the issue with the smartphone. We're so connected. We're on 24/7. I mean, patients are able to email me and call me and get a hold of me like never before. Before we had smartphones and all this stuff. I mean, people would just call the office, leave a message. I can't even tell you now. I'm inundated all the time. People are calling me at 7 in the morning. They're calling me at 8 at night. They're emailing me round the clock. It becomes difficult. It becomes overwhelming when you're always connected. You have to disconnect. Everybody has to disconnect, for a brief period. You have to have some time for yourself. Right.
So may I circle back when you were giving those wonderful lifestyle changes? I was hoping that maybe you could address alcohol for,
Sure.
alcohol consumption for men while trying to conceive. And what does that do to the testosterone level, if anything?
So, first, let me start by saying I love alcohol. I'm a Scotch fan. So nothing like a good single malt scotch. Alcohol in moderation is okay, right? Because alcohol also acts as a bit of a stress reliever. So if you come home from a hard day at work and you want to have a drink, again, in moderation, I think it's great. It's social. It helps many people unwind. The problem with alcohol is when you start getting out of moderation, and what is moderation? There have been a number of studies that looked at alcohol consumption and fertility in men. And what they found is if you're drinking more than 7 drinks a week, meaning more than 1 drink a day, probably too much. And if you can lower it to a couple of drinks a week, probably okay. I don't think there's really any reason why someone can't have a drink every now and then, or a couple of times a week. I don't think that it will affect a man's fertility. Geez, look at college campuses and, kids getting pregnant. I'm sure they consume lots and lots and lots of alcohol. Now, clearly it has different effects on different age groups, so on and so forth. But I think everything in moderation, outside of smoking. Smoking is horrendous. Smoking wreaks havoc on the body. I am an ex-smoker. I can tell you it wreaked havoc on my body. In the years that I smoked, I'm so happy I was able to quit a number of years ago. So I certainly empathize with people who were smokers. It's really a tough habit to break. For me, it wasn't so much the nicotine. It was just I enjoyed smoking, and I enjoyed the social aspect of it, and I enjoyed having something in my hand. I could bring my hand to my mouth, take a nice long drag on a cigarette, and that and a drink would really, cut my stress down. But clearly these are, unhealthy coping strategies for stress reduction. And finding healthier strategies will again be much more beneficial in the long run.
So put down the cigarette and put down the cell phone and go sit on a beach. This is the answer to aging and to the biological clock, it sounds like.
Look, I think that age is just a number. At the end of the day, it's how you feel. If you're unhappy at 30, what's the difference that you were 30? And if you're happy at 60 or 70 or 80, then what's the difference that you're 60 or 70 or 80? I mean, it truly isn't about how old you are. It's about wisdom. When you acquire that wisdom and when you can learn to be happy. Again, easier said than done. The one thing that I like about me, truthfully, is I've done all these bad things. I'm no saint, and I can relate to everybody who likes to drink or who smokes cigarettes or so on and so forth, or is overweight. I've been overweight. I've been in good shape back and forth. I've never been obese, but I certainly, as a matter of fact, my wife tells me now I got to lose another 10 or 15 pounds. So that's next on my list of things to do. But I can certainly relate to men going through all this and being now 50 and going through midlife. I get that too. And, what I just wish, and I don't know how to achieve this, and maybe one day someone will figure it out, is how to take my brain at 50 with the wisdom I acquired and put that in the body of a 20-year-old. That, to me, would be heaven.
So, Doctor, we've been asking, Sara and I, who, we asked for a pearl of wisdom. So if you had, listening into this line with us today, today is for Men's Health Month, June's Men's Health Month. What would be one pearl of wisdom, and hearing from you that you've gained your wisdom through experience? So what would you tell? I think it was lovely what you just said about, been there, done that. You're not preaching, you're living along with everybody else. So what would be a pearl of wisdom?
My biggest pearl of wisdom, the thing that's made the biggest difference in my life, I think, is to realize what's really important and try not to let the small, unimportant things get under your skin. So, and what's really important is going to be different for different people. But for me, number one, it really is having that sense of gratitude. It lets you open up. It stops you from being closed. When you can be appreciative. So being appreciative for all the good things in my life, and everybody hopefully has some good things in their life to greater and lesser degrees. I think that is certainly a very important place to start. It's not about how much money you have, because clearly there's a lot of unhappy people who have gazillions of dollars in Beverly Hills. It's really about who you are and how you appreciate things, and then letting go of the unimportant things and focusing on the important. For me, it's been the birth of my daughter, and becoming a parent at age 49, I was certainly able to focus into she's the most important thing in my life, and all those other things that seem so important in the moment, the fires that needed to be put out and those stressors, and whether something cost a little more, took a little more time, or a little less time, didn't get done on time, all those things become so unimportant in the total scheme of things. And I think that getting to a state of happiness is letting go of all the little stupid things that make you unhappy, that pile up and accumulate, kind of like someone throwing a dirty blanket over you. And you just gotta get out from under it. And I think some of the techniques that we talked about, living a healthier, cleaner lifestyle, a healthy, positive attitude, gratitude, all those things I think are keys. I don't have one pearl, but I think, and number one, number two is, I don't think it's something that anybody gets up and does overnight. I think that's setting someone up for failure. If you think that, like, Monday morning, tomorrow morning, I'm going to listen to this, and I'm going to, all of a sudden make a change, and by Monday night, I'm going to feel a heck of a lot different. This is all stuff that takes time, but it also takes commitment. So commitment is another big word, after gratitude. Committing to yourself, committing to become healthier, committing to become happier, committing to really show the people who you care about in your life that you love them and you're happy that you're with them. So that's a long pearl. That's a string of pearls.
Thank you. That was great. That was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So I always love talking to you, Dr. Worthman. You just always have some awesome, wonderful things to share, and I think you're doing men so much service in your practice, and in just how much care you bring to your profession and to men. Men in the health world, I think men don't have as many advocates as they need, and it's really just awesome to have you as an advocate and as a friend and as a healer to help men find their paths. So thank you for sharing and for the work you do.
And talking to us on your ride.
So, sure. Well, let me express gratitude to both of you, for the work that you both do and trying to help stimulate the conversation and bringing more awareness to men. It's interesting that two women are the impetus for bringing awareness to men, but I assume it's because you care about your husbands and your children, your families, and so on and so forth. So let me express gratitude for you for taking an hour and a half of your time, and a lot more, I'm sure, an hour and a half with me, but I'm sure many, many, many hours in terms of the things that you do to make sure people are healthier and happier. So thank you.
Well, thank you. All right. Have a wonderful evening. Bye, Sarah. Bye, Doctor.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.